Hello and welcome to the Maiden Romance podcast. I'm your host Sarah Bailey, and we also have my co-host here, Sab, aka SR7.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's show, we have a very lovely guest, author Rebecca Hefner.
Hello, Sarah and Sab. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Really nice to have you.
Okay, so we'll get straight into it. On today's podcast, talking about the 50 Shades effect. Very exciting topic.
Definitely.
So, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about why we're talking about this topic and how 50 Shades has become a worldwide phenomenon. So, it came out in 2011, which is about 9 years ago now. I can't even believe it's been that long.
Wow.
As we know, it was originally Twilight fan fiction, which is another huge phenomenon, but we're not going to talk about YA romance. And I don't think, to memory in recent years, I don't think there's been a book that's changed the landscape of adult romance quite like this in the past 9 years. So I want to start by asking the question, how has romance changed for you as a result of 50 Shades, not only as a writer, but also as a reader? Whoever wants to take that question first.
Sab, you want to go first?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky for me. So before I picked up 50 Shades, I'd already dipped my toe into like mature, darker romance books, than the sweet, soft ones that I'd grown up reading. So like around that time, just before 50 Shades, well, probably around 50 Shades when it came out and exploded, I'd already been reading like J.R. Ward and Shiloh Walker, which pretty much led me through the door to a part of romance I'd never read before. So when 50 Shades did explode and kind of became a thing, I found I wasn't scrambling to pick it up straight away. I actually came across it when a relative stayed with me for, I think, a week. They were on a holiday. She had the books and she was pestering me to read them, and I was like, oh, okay, let me just give it a go. So I started reading it, and I remember finding myself a bit disturbed by it, and it's not because of the BDSM. It was because of the level of romance between the main characters. And for me, I just found it was lacking something that I heavily relied and looked forward to when reading romance. So, in a way to describe it, for me, this hero was too cold and incredibly controlling, and the heroine was far too submissive. Despite there being evidence of defiance at times, it just wasn't appealing enough for me as a reader. So as a result, it wasn't satisfying for my happily ever after. And well, that's just my opinion. I think it's fair to say that 50 Shades Effect opened a hellmouth of erotic romance and dark romance over the years. And it's kind of helped me read and discover what I love and hate as a reader and a writer. And as a reader, I tend to gravitate to anti-heroes, and I do the same with writing. I don't actually mind the male protag being a prick for a while, as long as that changes as the story progresses, and as long as we understand why he's, being a dickhead. But as for the heroine, I always go for a strong and no nonsense kind of girl. I don't actually mind her being weak in the beginning, but oh my god, she just really needs to develop strength before that 50% of the book, otherwise I actually end up screaming. So, like, an example, I think, for me, in terms of trying to describe this is, from my opinion, I'm going to use Beauty and the Beast, for example, and I know there's been like dark retellings of Beauty and the Beast, but I won't go into that. But the Beast, was really like mean in the beginning, and we know why he was mean. He was really mean before he became a beast. And Belle, as sweet as she is, she's actually independent and quite feisty, and has an adorable knack of doing whatever she wants, no matter what he says or how scary he is. And in the end, they actually help each other, and they actually grow together, and they change one another. And even though the bad shit happens, like Gaston, who's the epitome of every awful guy in the universe,
Yeah.
they end up both coming together and saving each other, and they earn their happily ever after. My point in all of this is that after 50 Shades, there were many romance books featuring overly dominant heroes and too submissive heroines. And it actually had me holding on tighter to the paranormal kind of romances and kind of like fantasy romances that I had already been reading, because they never let me down. And I think because of that, that's what I enjoy as a reader. It's what made me determined as a writer to create passionate heroes and heroines who have a bit of darkness and enjoy a fight, but who also who help me enjoy a good enough romance to make it work. Probably doesn't make sense, but that's kind of like how I feel in terms of 50 Shades and what it's done for me over the years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like, yeah, you're talking about J.R. Ward. I remember when I discovered J.R. Ward back in like 2005, maybe, and I was like, this is so good. I've never seen anything like this. Like, what is this? It's amazing. And it was, yeah, kind of like erotic in ways. Like, I was one of those readers who discovered Alora's Cave very early on. I don't know. Do you guys remember Alora's Cave?
No, I've never heard of
No.
it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so it might have only been big in the U.S. I don't know if it was worldwide, but it was kind of like the first erotic publishing house, I think, that I discovered, and they had all of these authors, some of whom are still popular today. Like Laura Lee was one of their biggest authors. You guys have heard of her, right?
No.
No? Okay. Oh, actually, her books are really good. I mean, like, I read them, over 10 years ago, but I just remember them being really good, and they're like super steamy and explicit. And I remember discovering these Alora's Cave books, and it was so interesting to me because I'm one of those people who, like most romance readers, I snuck into my mother's bedroom and read her romance novels.
Yeah.
Did you guys do that too? Yes.
Yeah, I did that to my mum.
Right. And I would sneak in and read them. And she had like Judith McNaught, Nora Roberts, Laverell Spencer, like sort of all of the old, Sandra Brown, like all of the old historical romances. And they were still kind of steamy for the 80s when I was a kid. But like that's how I fell in love with romance. And then when I discovered J.R. Ward and then I discovered Alora's Cave, it was like next level, like erotica. And I was like, whoa. And this was before like reading romance was cool. And like I was in my early 20s and I would tell people like, oh my God, I discovered these awesome books by Alora's Cave. And I would like lend the books to my friends and they would be like, what the hell? I mean, like, this is porn. I'd be like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Like, it's great. So I didn't really understand the problem. But I think that that's kind of where 50 Shades comes in because, yeah, I think that reading that stuff used to be taboo. So when I would lend these, and you could only get them in paperback, or you could like download them in PDF form from Alora's Cave's website. Like it was like super pre-self-publishing, and like they were still figuring things out. But anyway, I would lend these books to my friends, and they would like give them back to me and be like, I can't read this. Like this is so steamy or whatever. But then eventually 50 Shades came along, and it just really sort of, everybody was reading it, and it was being picked for like middle-aged mothers book clubs and stuff like this. And it just totally normalized erotic romance, I think, which was so good for us as authors who write steamy things. And just so good to sort of like normalize that it's okay for women to read things, books that have people like having sex and getting their own pleasure. And, to me, that was the greatest thing about 50 Shades. And, I didn't love 50 Shades when I read it. I remember reading it and thinking there are such better books with better plot development and better writing from these like Alora's Cave authors that nobody knows about. But still, regardless, it was so good to just normalize things for the romance industry and for romance readers. And so, yeah, I'll always be thankful to 50 Shades for that.
Totally. I get that. I would say the same thing, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer this. For me, I didn't read 50 Shades when it first came out because I just thought, I think I was like in my early 20s. Was I in my early 20s? Yes, because it came out 9 years ago. And I was more into fantasy like YA romance at that point. So I was like, I'm not reading that because it's, you know, this is genuinely, I was like this when I was younger. I was like, I don't want to read that, but probably too much erotica in it. And then I finally got into reading more steamier stories, and then I finally read 50 Shades, and I was like, what is this? I got used to like erotic scenes by then, but then I read that and I was like, this book is just not for me. And why I then proceeded to read the next two books, don't ask me, but hey, we're not going to talk about the merits of 50 Shades here.
Right.
But I do think that I am grateful for 50 Shades because of the way it normalized, you know, romance that's more erotic. And, you know, it's normalized people being able to read it in public without being embarrassed, because you see these stories of people just reading it on the train, going to work, and it was like this big thing. And suddenly we were all allowed to write steamy romance without anyone really kind of going, oh, but romance is, you know, supposed to be not like that. And as a woman, I felt like, oh, finally what we want in romance, and no one's going to kind of go, you can't write that.
Right.
Or, you know, so as a reader, I don't know that it changed my taste very much, but as a writer, it certainly helped me, because obviously I darker romances, and I tend to gravitate towards anti-heroes like Sab does. So I think for that reason, I am grateful for 50 Shades, even if I do not like the books myself.
Yep, makes sense.
Definitely. Okay, so we'll go on to one of the next questions. As we were talking about this topic, how do you think that 50 Shades changed the way people view erotic romance?
Sab, you wanted to take this one first?
Oh gosh.
I mean, you don't have to. I can take
Yeah,
it.
you take it.
Okay. How do I think it changed it? I think it adjusted people's views quite heavily, because, well, my opinion of not romance, of the wider public, was before that people were reading this stuff behind closed doors, and people kind of thought if you read that kind of stuff, you were reading porn. And I'm like, that's not porn. Especially not if it's, you know, erotic romance or just romance in general. It's not, you know, about that. For me, like, sex in books is about showing the emotional connection between the two characters, not, I mean, yes, it can be titillating. I'm not going to deny that that's part of the reason that I read and write it. However, I don't write it for that purpose, read it for that purpose particularly. But I think that it did make it more acceptable in society for not only people to read it, but also to write it. And I think also it helped, like, the erotica genre become more less taboo, I guess. I think that's the biggest thing. It's kind of been like a revolution in bringing these to the forefront without people going, oh no, that you shouldn't be reading that. It's not polite or whatever. Actually, it's fine. Go ahead and read it because it's your personal taste. Although I do still think that we do have some stigma attached to the romance genre in general, but
Yeah,
you know, it is what it is.
I agree though, because I think it really, I mean, when self-publishing first exploded, I don't think that Amazon even had an erotica, like the erotica wasn't really listed under romance. It was like a whole different thing. And I think that they saw the success that these other companies, you know, like Alora's Cave and like these other independent companies were having, that people were voraciously purchasing and reading these books. And, you know, Amazon is nothing if not ambitious about taking over everybody else's business model and making it theirs. So I think that they saw this opportunity. And so then when they created this self-publishing engine and people were able to upload these erotic stories and things like that, and 50 Shades came along and normalized it so much that, yeah, I mean, you know, people began sort of putting them all in one group. So you could download a Lisa Kleypas novel, and you could download a Laura Lee novel, and you could download, you know, a Sarah Bailey novel and whatever. And it's all the same, right? It's all under romance, and you could read all of those on the train and not be embarrassed or, whatever, because 50 Shades had just kind of normalized it, that it's just, it's a romance. It might have different levels of theme, or it might have this, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of grouped the same way now. And that's so nice, because when you're reading a good romance, like you said, Sarah, regardless of the level of theme, whether it's a sweet romance with closed door scenes, or whether it's a more steamy romance and it has more, erotic scenes or whatever, it's really, if it's written well, that those scenes are about the emotions between the characters. So regardless of the level of theme, I think it allowed people to have higher levels of theme, but still have really good plot development and character development, and show that that's something that really can make the reader feel, emotionally connected to the book.
It's like enhancing what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Okay, so what should we go for next, right? Do you think it's allowed us to write about more darker topics, or at least has it become more acceptable to write darker topics in mainstream fiction?
Okay, I can take this one. Okay, so for me, it's it's both. Obviously, a lot of what I said before can be applied to that question. So I didn't start writing my fantasy romance until 8 years ago or something, 7 years ago, 2013 or something around there. And that when I first tried writing fantasy romance, it was quite explicit. I'm not entirely sure where the inspiration for it came from, whether it was because 50 Shades had made it more acceptable, or whether all the romance novels that I'd read over the years made me feel like I could be brave and write my own. But I would say it was both, and I can definitely agree that the exposure of 50 Shades gave birth to quite a lot, and I think it made people braver. And I think, is it fair to say that a lot of dark romances was kind of
Mm-hmm.
came from 50 Shades, but was a result, or like a domino effect of it. But I can say that I really do enjoy dark romances today, and as a result, I do find myself writing darker, and I do get braver with it every time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like I think I say this in all of like my reviews of Sarah's books, like I'm actually not a huge dark romance fan, but unless it's done well, which Sarah does it so well. So that's why I'm able to like follow. It's true, because I have read some other dark romance books, like I'm not a fan of these bully romance books where like the guy is so mean to the girl. Like I don't think any self-respecting woman would ever like
No.
fall in love with a guy like that. And I apologize to like anyone who's going to listen to this and loves those type of books. I mean, that's your prerogative, right? Like we all have different things that we like and dislike, things that
Yes.
connect with us and things that don't. So I'm certainly not saying that if you love those types of bully romances, whatever, that's great. It's just not my thing. But yeah, I do agree that it has opened the door for more dark romance, but there are good and bad things with that, because you have really good dark romance writers, and those are the ones that I enjoy. But then there are some that I read that I just don't. I find that there are like consent issues and things like that, and that's tough. And I mean, Sarah's read my books, and she knows I wrote a very dark character whose name is Dark Rip, and I was very worried. Yeah, I know. It's so funny. I was very worried when I published this series that people were going to like, because he does really bad things in his past, but he has this huge transformation that is very difficult because he is literally comprised of evil. And so you have to write that really well to make the reader sympathetic to them. And I remember saying to my editor, like, you have to help me. Like, I have to make sure that people don't hate this character. It turns out that he's like the most loved character of the series. So it's amazing.
Yes.
Right? I know Sarah loves him. So yeah. So anyway, my point is, if you do it right and you write dark romance well, I do agree that that's something that came out of this 50 Shades movement, and there are some really good ones out there. But also, I think the bad side effect is that there are some that have questionable content, plot development, and or character development. And that's maybe the downside to it. But at the end of the day, I guess, all the more romances that are out there, the better for all of us. So that's good.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, as a dark romance writer, I'm grateful for 50 Shades for normalizing it. However, I didn't actually start reading dark romance until Sab suggested to me that I read Pepper Winters, who we both agree is like the queen of dark romance.
Oh, nice. I haven't read her. I need to add her. Okay, that's
who
good.
I aspire to actually be as good as.
Nice.
You're on level safely.
Okay, thank you. And the first dark romance I read was Pepper Winters, and it was her first debut book, which I think she debuted back in 2013. So
yes,
which is called Tears of Tess. Which this was after the obviously 50 Shades, and it was, it involved kidnapping and sex trafficking, which sounds terrible. However, I kind of, when I read this, and I obviously read the hero, and I'm kind of like, what is this man? But I kind of fell in love with it anyway. I'm not going to say I'm a hugest fan of that particular series, because I'm not. The next two books, the other books are not as good as the first one, but that was my introduction into dark romance. And then I kept reading, and then I read her Debt Inheritance series, which gets really messed up.
It's probably the most messed up series out of what she's done.
Yes,
so far.
it is.
Safely.
Is it even more messed? Is it? Oh, well, you're reading the Goddess stuff. Is that not quite as messed up as?
Listen, the Goddess. The Indebted series is it's very different. The Goddess Isles is probably hands down, in my opinion, the best one she's done so far out of the kind of world, the universe she's created around these series, because they're all interlinked. The characters are all interlinked somehow, and I think the Goddess Isles is the best one, because I wouldn't say it's messed up on that level of Indebted. Maybe you need to explain a little bit for Rebecca to understand just like Indebted, yeah.
Okay, essentially it's about this family who one family has this kind of, I guess it's like
it's like a grudge, like
it's a grudge that happened like in the 1800s or something, and since then every time the other family has a daughter, she gets taken by the first family and put through all of these called the debts, and each book is each debt, and they're really quite horrible. However, it sounds really bad. It's really dark, but the way she writes it is just, I think her writing is really beautiful. I think that's, and although I did kind of I got annoyed at the last book because I just thought it went on for too long. She writes really long books, but yeah, I've never read anything like that before. I don't think I'm ever going to read anything quite as crazy as that again. However, I just found that the way she writes characters is the reason that I enjoyed it, and I was like, I want to write one of these myself. So that is how my first dark romance came about, was because of essentially those series that I read by Pepper.
Nice.
And the other person I also read that I don't think Sab's read is called T.M. Fraser. She also writes dark romances, but they're different Peppers. And those are the two I read, and that's why I wanted to write dark romance, and that's where obviously Corrupt Empire came from.
Nice.
And so yeah, I would say that I thank 50 Shades for bringing this into the world, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have never got into dark romance. If Sab hadn't said to me, you need to read this. So yeah, I think that it does allow, certainly I'm allowed to write darker topics. I am very careful about what I write because I know that in dark romance there is one of the key parts of dark romance is the power imbalance between the hero and the heroine, and there can be issues with consent, and I don't always appreciate that myself. I think there is a line and you shouldn't cross it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, personally. So if I find something that does have a warning about it being, you know, I'm always kind of wary of like trigger warnings and things like that. Because there are certain books where I just think it crosses the line, and there's certain taboo subjects that have come out of this that I also think cross a line. And one of my authors that I enjoy has written a lot of these taboo books, and I'm like, I don't want to read those because I have no interest in that subject.
And that's why, I mean, you do such a good job writing from the point of view of the heroine. I think that's what's most important of like, you write the heroine so that she gives consent in her mind, and you see the evolution of that. And I think that's what a lot of these dark romance books miss, so that we as the reader are left like apart from that whenever she decided that this was what she wanted to move forward with or whatever. And as long as that's on the page, I'm good with it. But I think that some writers leave that off the page and leave the reader to just assume it. And that's where I'm like, no.
No, I agree. Assumed consent is not good enough. Like, it has to be either in their head or vocalized. And that's where I draw the line also. And that is how I write them as well.
Yeah, you do. No, it's nice. It's actually like, that's, I think that's how it should be. And I think some of these other authors, I mean, look, it's at the end of the day, we still live in a free country for now. And well, you guys are over in your own free country, but like, you still can publish, this is you can publish what you want, but everybody's going to like different things, and the level of darkness and the level of consent. And I think the three of us are all on the same page about like consent is very important.
That's partly why Sab reads my book, so she can tell me if I go too far with anything. And she has.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. No, Sarah does a good job. She does a great job.
Yeah.
Even when I go too far, I listen to her and take it back.
I'm glad you
nice.
do. Sometimes Sarah doesn't listen to me, Rebecca. We have problems sometimes.
You about most things. Oh no, that is things like, you need to make this character happy, and I'm like, that doesn't serve the story right now.
Yeah,
so no, that's different.
Potato it's cool. Don't worry about it.
Anyway, on the topic of darker subjects, do you think that obviously I'm not going to make a comment on how this aspect of things was depicted in 50 Shades, because I don't agree with the way it was depicted, but I think that BDSM brought 50 Shades brought BDSM into the wider public, and I think, do you think that this is now people are more open about this?
Yes, I think 100%.
100%.
I do. I think it makes them braver. I think it's I think it's kind of like, I think it's safe to say that it has made people feel, well, writers who probably have wanted to explore that level of writing, or just dip their toe. I think it, as you kind of said before, kind of made it more accepting, and therefore I think for the wider public, they'd be more open. I do, I think so.
I agree too. I mean, I think so I grew up in the South I grew up in North Carolina, which is like in this like Bible Belt town, where one of the first things I learned in life is that when you grow up in a really conservative place, that everybody is like secretly a freak. So like the more repressed you are, like the more there are just so many like secret, and I'm like, that's great, like get your freak on, awesome. So I mean, I think it's so funny that when 50 Shades came out, you actually like like your friends would begin to tell you like, oh yeah, did you read 50 Shades? Like, oh, they do the whole like tying up in the bed thing. I love that. And you'd be like, what? You do? Like, I think it became like more like everyone was kind of like okay being like, oh yeah, I love it when like I love the whips and chains and the I like to try that out with my partner. Like I think people became like less closed door and they were able to talk about it, and that's great because at the end of the day, yeah, we're all freaky. It's just whether we tell each other about it or not, right?
That's true.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing about ever writing that kind of stuff is you get this. Some people, I've actually been asked if I do stuff like that, and I'm like, it's called research.
Best answer ever. Amazing.
It's called research. Just because you write, I know that there's a lot of people who do engage in that kind of relationship, who are writers. However, I'm going to put this on record. I do not personally, but it is called research, and research can tell you pretty much everything you want to know is available on the internet. So if you're not researching it, then I'm gonna probably notice.
Yep.
But yeah, I've genuinely been asked that, and I just think, why do you even want to know, for starters? Just because I don't want my public life and personal life put all over the internet. But I think, yeah, I do think, obviously, because I have written it, as we know, because you've read my books. But yes, it's called research, and I think it has allowed people to be more open about it. Whether they're too open is another matter. It's now normalized, and I think that's a good thing, and can be a bad thing as well, because there's certain things as too much information.
Right. True.
Isn't there this thing where people think that women sit around gossiping about their sex lives, and I'm like, I don't do that, so I don't understand. Maybe other women do, but I'm like, I don't do that. So where has this thing come along from? Where people sit around?
It comes from movies, okay? They see like sleepovers. They see like movies where girls have sleepovers, and that's all they talk about. This is where it comes from. It's not real life.
Right.
I don't think so anyway. I mean,
on a personal level, I've never met any women who do that. But then again, I have mostly grown up with male friends, so that might be why.
I'm trying to think of what my friends and I do. So like, I'm trying to think if we do that. Like, I mean, we're all like professional like women who like hang out on the weekends. I mean, yeah, have I asked my friends like, how big their partner, like, well, we'll be like, oh, did you get a dick pic? Did you, what was it in? Like, oh yeah, sure. I mean, we say that like jokingly, but like, yes. It's kind of fun. But yeah, I don't think we really, I don't know. I mean, my group of friends is really fun. We text each other. We have this like text chain of like 10 of us, and we just text like funny memes and stuff, especially now since we can't like leave our house. But yes. But yeah, I don't know if we like really get into intimate details of sex. Probably not.
You heard it here first. This doesn't happen with women.
Yeah. Although I will say, I did send them, there's this link about this like vibrator that's supposedly amazing, and I did send it to all of them because I wanted them to have that information for the lockdown. So they did read all the reviews, and I'm pretty sure several of them ordered it. But anyway, that's a whole other thing.
I think that's doing a service during
that's
what it is. Right?
It's so different. You've done a good thing.
Especially when you're not locked down with your partner or person that you're seeing.
Right. Or solo, like me. Like, I'm in lockdown with my cat. So, like, these things need to be known that, like, if there is a vibrator with, like, 1,700 5-star reviews on Amazon, I need to share that with my friends.
Yeah. Important.
I agree. Oh, dear. Okay. And our final question that I have is, does being a romance reader or writer still carry the same stigma as it used to, i.e. romance? Obviously, I don't think romance is trashy. I'm going to put that out there. And did 50 Shades make it worse or better?
So I'll tackle this one first. So like I said, I grew up in a very conservative area. My mom still lives in the same small town where I grew up in North Carolina. And I have to say that when I I started writing these novels years ago, never intending to publish them. I just did it for myself. It was like fan fiction for myself. But then I eventually decided that I wanted to try and make a go of it because I saw all these other people who were self-published, and I'm like, if they can do it, I really feel like I can figure out how to do it. So I, left my job and like got an editor and like really started like making these stories better. And I just remember thinking like, how am I going to, like, this is going to be a crap show because I'm going to like release these books out. They're so normal to me. It's so normal for me to read words like clit and pussy and things like that in a book. Like, sorry, not sorry. I read those books all the time. But I just kept thinking like, oh my God, my mother is going to read these. And and so are my friends, and like, what are they going to think? And I had to really get over that. And it was difficult because, I don't know, I was terrified, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, I put them out there with the realization that number one, I'm an adult. I can read and write whatever I want. And if people have a problem with it, it's their problem, not my problem. It's like, that's their own stuff. And secondly, I think with the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon and the fact that I'm releasing these books after like that book has already been made into 3 movies. Everybody knows the story. It's so normal that I'm releasing these books out to people whose mom has probably read 50 Shades of Grey, and at the end of the day, it's been received very well. And I think that, I have had the occasional comment like, oh, I didn't realize you were going to have, these scenes in your books. And I'm like, okay, so like, then don't read them. Like, I don't know what you want me to say, but it's been so much better received than I thought. And I'm very proud of them. And I'm proud of like the steamy scenes because I think they show such an emotional like connection between the characters. And so I think there hasn't been as much of a stigma as I think I was worried about in the beginning. And I'm so thankful for that. So that's my answer to that.
Cool. Well, that's good. That's really good.
I had a similar thing with obviously my mother reads my books. In fact, I think we had a conversation about this once, about our mothers reading
We
our
did.
scenes. Oh my gosh. So I'm gonna put this out there. My mom proofreads my books.
That's awesome.
Because she is a teacher and she's like, okay, my mother is like the most pedantic woman you've ever met in your life, and she's a stickler for rules and all sorts not a stickler for rules. When people meet my mother, they think that she's like this really lovely, innocent woman, and I'm just like, okay, you've met me, right? So where do you think that came from? It didn't happen overnight. My mum is the worst for innuendos, the worst for all sorts of things. She has the dirtiest mind ever, and I just was like, how do you trick these people into thinking that you're not disturbed in the head, mother? So when I first gave her my book with sex in it, I was really embarrassed about it. But those were tame scenes. And then when I first gave her a dark romance, I was like, oh God. And then one day she said, I invited her over, I think it was last year when I had her over for Mother's Day. And she goes, I'll only come over on the proviso that there won't be any butt plugs and handcuffs involved. And I was like, Mum, what? So that kind of goes to show what kind of woman my mother is. and my dad has read my novels. Some of my family have read my novels. I think the worst thing was my husband's family read one of them, and his aunt goes, I didn't know that there was going to be so much sex in it. But But in general, I don't think anyone really bats an eyelid to it anymore. In fact, that's kind of what I'm known for, is writing sex. When people read
Exactly.
my books, they pick it up and I have to write sex in them. Otherwise, people are going to be like, "What's wrong with Sarah? Why isn't she enough sex in this book?" I get this kind of, I'm really scared about that. So I think I've spoken about this before, but when I was writing Promises, that's one of the things that I was worried about, is that the sex doesn't occur until like over 50% into the book. So, I was like, are people gonna like not like that? But no, no one had a bad word to say about that.
I loved that book. I'm such a slow burn fan, so like that was probably my favorite book of yours. I love those steamy novellas that you write, but that I think Promises is my favorite book.
Steamy novellas. Those are more about the sex than the plot, but we won't go to... That's the point.
I was like, you're right.
Hey, some people just want a book that's not quite erotica, but also it has that romance, but it also has lots of sex in it. So,
totally.
I'm one of those people. Hold my hands up. But no, I don't think I've had this people look down at me for being a romance writer. The only time I've ever really seen that is some idiot on Twitter saying, "Oh, romance is for women and it's trashy," and I'm like, whatever. To those people, I'm like,
so
you clearly have not read a romance. And
exactly.
Actually, you should have respect for romance writers, because it's not an easy thing to do, to write a believable romance story.
Exactly.
So that's the only time I've ever had anyone say anything negative, and then so I therefore just ignore it as in general.
Totally makes sense. What about you, Sab? Have you had anyone like have reservations about the sex?
God, where do I start? So basically, I just want to say, like, I don't think I'm in any danger of my parents reading my books, by the way, because firstly, though they know I write, they have no idea what I write. they don't know. My mum knows that I write romance. My dad, I just don't think he actually knows what I write. He just never asks. He just says, "Oh, my daughter's a writer," but little do they know what I write. So sometimes, Sarah, when I buy your books, which is like all the time, and they come in paperback, my mum, she's like, "Oh, is that Sarah's book?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then she'll pick it up, and then she'll read, like like someone flicks through a book. So she'll randomly open a page in the book, and I'm just like, "Oh shit, I bet you that's a sex thing." But it's a sex thing. But like the level of panic that I go through, I don't know why, because I don't know, but I just quickly take the book from her, because I'm just terrified that she'll see something and be like, "Serena, you read these books?" But she has no idea. But basically, so years ago when I started writing fantasy romance, I keep going back to fantasy romance because that's basically where everything that I want to write about goes into, basically. The darkness and the sex and everything. When I started writing that, I had a friend read it, and it was like the first draft, and the level of like dark sex and filth that was in that book was just terrible. But she I remember her looking at me with different eyes, and I was like, what is it? And she basically I think in her head she kind of feels like this is my life, and I'm like, it's really not. Like she teases me to this day. She's like, "Do you do this? This is what you do? Is this your kink?" I'm like, it's really not. Like honestly, it's not. As you say, Sarah, it's definitely research, and I think a lot of the time, people don't believe you. And I think also I had another friend. She couldn't actually read my story because she kept, and I think this is quite sad, but she kept reading it and seeing me as the heroine. And I'm like, oh my God, like it upset me so much because I was like, And it's not a me problem, it's definitely a her problem, because she needs to kind of, I know that she knows me, but she needs to separate how she sees me from a story. But she
Right.
couldn't read it because she kept envisioning me and my boyfriend as this couple, and I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
that's not it. And I don't know, I just got really upset. But so that aside, every time that friend who read my first draft and who basically, like, she calls my story spicy. I think it's a compliment, but she calls it spicy. And whenever she talks to somebody at work, and this is where the horror comes in, because work is work, right? Like, I'm a different person when I'm at work. I'm very kind of timid and reserved. They don't know the real me. So whenever she tells someone at work, oh, Sab writes like really steamy, sexy stories, the look that I get is horrifying for me, because I'm just like, I want to just bury myself in a hole, because then the questions come. The questions like, really? Like, Sabrina, you write this stuff? Is it a sex book? Is it like 50 Shades? And I swear, like, I'm just like, oh God, why? And it's always so difficult for me to basically say to them, no, I write romance. And they're like, oh, that's really sweet, you write romance. And then they're like, maybe I'll give it a go and maybe I'll read it. And I'm like, it's not sweet romance as such. It's a little bit of darkness in there. And then they're like, what do you mean darkness? And it's so hard to try and
Oh my gosh.
but it's so difficult to try and explain to people like what I write, because it's like trying to speak to them in another language. And therefore I just feel like every time somebody asks me what my book is about, I feel like I need to have like laminated cards with answers on them and just like hand it out to them and just not even open my mouth, because just like everything that I want to say never comes out. It's always like, I just need one word answer. I just need to just basically put it in like basic language for them. But this is there is the positives of 50 Shades, yeah. Definitely like improving the industry and, you know, making people more like conscious of all this stuff. But at the same time, it can be a little bit hard, and I think that's because a lot of the time, well, people that I've spoken to before often don't know the difference between erotica and romance, and they struggle to kind of place them in two separate categories. And it's like, you know, as I said, I feel braver. I feel a lot braver as I write. And only recently have I really started, Sarah, you know, like recently I've started to kind of like come out a lot more with my writing and relationships and sex scenes and stuff. And it is really freeing for me. It's really liberating. I really enjoy that. And I'm feeling braver about it, which is great. And I think I'm at a stage now where I tend to just separate kind of how friends view me. I think I kind of just embrace my writer side and just be like, yeah, this is what I read and this is what I write, and I don't really care what you think. But
That's awesome.
yeah, this is what I'm going to write about. And since then, since like 7 years ago or so, my friends who have stayed with me on this journey have since then read my recent works, and they've really liked it. Like, they've never said to me, oh, this is what you get up to, or like, this is what you do in the bedroom. Like, it's almost like they've grown with me, and they've kind of learned basically that it's more
just
about
fiction.
Exactly. And it helps me a lot, because they're like, oh, I really like it. They seem to dive into the story, which is great, because I love it when people talk to you about your characters like they're real people, rather than just, yeah, I just love it. It's great. It just makes you feel like you're doing a good job. And I don't know. So yeah, so basically that's what basically my answer, I suppose.
Basically what. I think there's a really easy distinction between that you can tell people between erotica and romance. Erotica is essentially about the sex, which is kind of putting it in very, very simple terms, and I wouldn't always say that that's fair to erotica writers, but then romance is about the couple falling in love, and there's a plot behind it, and there's a story, whereas erotica is mostly about being titillating, really, when you get down to it. But there are people who write really good erotica. I don't read it personally because that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to see the couple, but there's your easy way of saying to people, you can, that's what erotica is, and I don't write that. I write about romance, and it can be erotic romance, but it's still romance. There's still a happy ending, and that's, I think, the most important thing.
It's true.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much wraps up the discussion, unless anyone else has any topics to bring up to do with 50 Shades of Grey.
No, but what an awesome discussion, because it's like so nice to like be able to talk about how like now it's totally cool that like steamy romance is normal.
Exactly. I love it. Like, where would I kind of think, where would I be if that was not normal? Like, would I be writing?
Right? Good question.
I just fully love a really filthy book. Like, I'd happily just forget my responsibilities and to eat and drink and bulldoze through as many filthy books as possible.
That's true.
So yeah,
Sam,
we
discussed this in last week's podcast. However, Sab says to me, because if Sab wants a filthy book, she asked me, right? She said to me, "What is the filthiest book?" She asked me some book suggestions, so I said, "Oh, here you go." And she goes, "What is the filthiest one?" So I told her what it was. She read it and she was like, "Oh my god, Sarah!"
Yeah.
So I can say if anyone wants any recommendations on filthy books, so they're still very good romances, you can ask me. I will quite happily recommend some very dark. Most of them are dark, not that dark, but they are filthy, and I kind of love that.
Yeah, I'm down too. Like, yep.
Okay. Well, if anyone wants to drop me a DM and ask me on Twitter about filthy romance, please feel free.
little bit of promo there, Sarah. Like,
yeah.
I have purposes.
Yeah. Or if you want to pick up some filthy books, you can probably pick mine up, and they're quite steamy. There you go.
In the best way.
In the best way. And you should also go and pick Rebecca's books up, because they're wonderful as well. And
yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, Rebecca, I actually did I did buy The End of Hatred, and I am reading that. So
oh, great. Awesome.
So I'm very, very excited to go on this journey, because I've heard amazing things. So.
Oh my gosh, yay. Well, if you like J.R. Ward, I mean, she's definitely like, I was like, I have to write a vampire series, because I'm like, so yeah, I'm excited to hear what you think. That's awesome. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, so I think that just about wraps us up. So this was the Maiden Romance podcast. I'm your host, Sarah. There's Sab, and we want to say a big thank you to Rebecca for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much thanks for having me. You guys are great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here. Okay, guys, so we shall see you in the next episode. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.